Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Wendy Peebles.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Peebles with the U.S. Census Bureau Economic Management Division. The Census team is happy to host this webinar today titled How Census is Leveraging Real Dollar Data and Completing the Trade Picture. May is recognized as World Trade Month in the U.S., and this is an opportunity to show the positive impact of exporting on the U.S. economy. Today, we will provide valuable resources and information on how Real Dollar completes the trade picture. The U.S. Census Bureau is responsible for collecting, compiling, and publishing the monthly trade statistics on all goods imported and exported from the United States. How can this information help you? The U.S. Census Bureau provides detailed information on over 9,000 export commodities and 18,000 import commodities. This information can assist you in making informed decisions by tracking the global marketplace for your product and identifying possible opportunities to expand to new markets. The U.S. Census Bureau provides valuable resources and training on utilizing trade data, understanding the foreign trade regulations, and using the automated export system. So learn how Census uses import data to calculate real constant dollar estimates for wholesalers of consumer goods. For today's webinars, we have two presenters from the Economic Indicators Division, after which we will open it up for questions and answers. You may submit your questions using the Q&A feature located in the bottom right corner of your screen by clicking on the three dots. We have a team monitoring the questions and will address as many questions as possible in today's webinar. In the chat, you will receive links to the Census website for more information on data tools, resources, and additional training opportunities. Lastly, we ask that you complete the evaluation, which will be placed in the chat. When clicking the evaluation, it will take you to a secure site for completing the evaluation. We value your feedback, so please complete the evaluation as it assists us in planning future events. So at this time, we are ready to begin, and I will pass it over to Scott Sheeler.
Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate the introduction and all the background. As Wendy said, my name is Scott Sheeler, and I'm an Assistant Division Chief in our Economic Indicators Division. Economic Indicators Division is where the Census Bureau produces 12 of the 13 economic indicators, ranging everything from the international trade, which includes the imports and exports, to wholesale, to retail, manufacturing, etc. Today we're going to talk a little bit about wholesale, and I thought, maybe a good place to start would be to give a little bit of background on what I mean when I say wholesale. The traditional definition is, by North American Industry Classification System. This is Sector 42, and at the Bureau we measure the wholesale sector across three programs. First, and our most comprehensive program is our economic census, which we conduct every 5 years. With the reference year being every year ending in 2 and 7. Similar to our decennial census counterparts that count the population, the economic census is a program that captures granular data for all businesses in the United States across the economy. So the wholesale program will collect things like revenue and inventories by location and put out a number of reports by subnational geographic area. Then we have two programs that actually use that economic census to kind of help set as the sampling frame. We have our annual wholesale trade survey, which is about 8,400 companies, and includes all types of wholesalers, but focuses more on national level estimates collected primarily at the firm or division of firm level by as guided by that NAICS classification code. And primarily focuses on sales or revenue information, along with end-of-year inventories, purchases, some gross margins, and some information on electronic commerce. And then we have our economic indicator, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today. And that's about 4,200 companies. And this is the one that comes out every month, but has a focus on sales and end-of-month inventories. As I mentioned, wholesalers, there's a number of different types of wholesalers. There's your traditional, what many people think of when they think wholesaler, which is your distributor, right? That's your middleman between your manufacturer or your raw goods supplier and your retailer or some sort of manufacturing plant where the goods are being delivered. But there's also manufacturer sales branches and offices, which are tied to the domestic manufacturing plants. There's importers and exporters, which I think a lot of you will be familiar with as well, who have that designation. And then there's agents and brokers, which is where we also include like the electronic marketplaces, the B2B kind of marketplaces. And as I mentioned on that previous slide, we cover different things on the annual and the monthly survey and the economic census. The monthly survey is what we cover in the blue boxes, which is basically distributors, importers, and exporters. So looking more into like the different types of wholesalers, and this is data from our 2017 economic census, which is the most recent vintage. The collection of the 2022 is in the field currently, actually, and look for data on that beginning in 2024. But this is just like a pie chart representation of like those boxes and how much they all represent. The largest percentage is your distributors and jobbers, which is almost 60%. In the top left, you see the darker blue colors, which are your manufacturer sales branches and offices that relate to those domestic manufacturers of almost 30%. And then you'll kind of see, in the bottom left, you'll see, why we're here today talking and doing a joint presentation with our colleagues who work on the International Trade Program, which is, there are companies who identify as importers and exporters that would be included in wholesalers. There's own brand importer and marketers. So there is a component of the wholesale data that directly relates to the trade data. But of course, just because a company may or may not reflect themselves as an importer or an exporter doesn't mean they don't import or export, of course. And so one of the things the economic census puts out every 5 years is a class of customer kind of report where basically it says, okay, well, how much of your goods were sold to various class of customers. One of the class of customers is, hey, how much of the wholesaler sales are made up of goods that are exported? So this table tries to get at that picture. It's a lot of information on here, so I'm only going to highlight a couple of things. First, I'm going to highlight the wholesale trade up here in the top left. So overall of our wholesale trade, this is the merchant wholesale, excluding the manufacturer sales branches and offices. So this mirrors the monthly scope. About 4.5% of all sales are exported that wholesalers see. And of course, this varies. There's some industries that are very small. And then, of course, there's farm products, which is actually very large. And over a quarter of their sales actually get exported. This is, your soybeans, your grains, et cetera. So, I mean, I think it's important to kind of recognize that, while people may talk about wholesalers, there's a lot of importing and exporting that goes on across the economy. And so, we wanted, this is an opportunity to kind of like use data in conjunction to kind of, fill data gaps or improve what we're doing. So that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute. I do want to highlight that this data on this screen and data on subsequent screens are sample-based estimates. So they are subject to sampling error and non-sampling error. And so, we don't have any measures of error provided. So I just caution you in, trying to say that something that's, 8.2 is definitely greater than something that's 8.1 or something like that. But anyway, just a word of caution there. So a little bit more turning our attention to the monthly, which is what we want to talk about mostly today. Every month we put out this sales and inventories report, and this is a snapshot, of our website from last week. We had a report that covered March. It was released on Monday the 8th. And looking more into the data, this is like a quick look at the two items. So this first is seasonally adjusted inventory. So this is what were the value of inventories at the end of the month. So this would be end of March since we put out the March data. And this is about a 10-year span, goes back to like beginning of 2012. And you can kind of see, how the slope changes over time. The shaded area is the pandemic recession months. And you can see how that's kind of grown over time. One important thing to note here, though, is this data is nominal. This is, true value of the inventory. So what obviously there's different inventory methods, but generally what they paid for the inventories. And similarly, there's the sales, which we also measure on a monthly basis. This shows the latest data through our March release that I was mentioned before, and this is seasonally adjusted, where we, and our seasonal adjustment includes seasonal adjustment for seasonality, trading day, and moving holidays. And so, not too much different of a picture. Obviously, the big dip, at the beginning of the pandemic, but not much different of a picture. But when you look at that picture, your first reaction is, wow, look how steep that line is and how much the growth has been, in the past couple of years. But of course, when you think about it, these are nominal estimates, and there's been a lot of price fluctuations. I mean, there's always price fluctuations, but obviously in the last couple of years, maybe we've seen more than we normally do. And it's been all across the news, across pretty much every industry, that we measure, right? These are a couple of snapshots of headlines from different news sources, things from lumber to energy to food, soybeans. There's been a lot of price fluctuations, and we recognize that providing nominal estimates is nice, but to really provide some data value to our users, it would be good to try to adjust those data for prices. So what did we do? Well, beginning in September of 22, we released the first estimates of real dollar sales for wholesale. It's issued as an experimental data product, which basically just is a designation we put on new products that give us a chance to kind of, put out the methodology, get some reaction, make some adjustments before it becomes a formal data product. So that's the approach we took here. We followed the lead of our colleagues in the international trade area who already do a lot of price adjustment. We also met with some people from our sister agency and did a lot of discussions with them at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We leveraged things that are already being done. And what did we use? We used data from the published wholesale data, and we used data from the import program here at Census. We used price indices from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and from that we were able to come up with this real dollar estimates. The coverage does match what we do in the monthly wholesale, and we were able to carry this real dollar estimates back to 2012 to give some sort of historical perspective, and we also used that as the base year. So how did we put all of this together, right? Not to get into too much into the weeds, but there's a couple of pictures that hopefully maybe give a little bit of a flavor of what we did. So on the left, we basically took the data we had. We had, wholesale data. We had wholesale data from the economic census broken down by products. So we could see within a certain industry, like in farm products, how much of the sales were soybeans or corn or rice. We could see, we had data from manufacturing and manufacturing shipments. We obviously had import data, which was a key thing we wanted to include, because when there are sales made, a lot of that data is imported and as part of the sale. And from that, we were able to create product weights with these domestic and import breakouts, so we could align it then with the price indexes from BLS. So on the right there, we take those product weights and we couple them with the producer price index for the appropriate commodity. We then also, bring in the import price indexes from the import-export price program at BLS. And from that, we were able to create price deflators, which we could then apply to the nominal numbers and get real dollar estimates of wholesale sales. So why does it matter? We did all this work, sounds good. How does it change the picture? Well, first, one of the things is to point out, we do release this at the same time as the monthly program each month. And so at the 10 o'clock, when the monthly wholesale program goes out on the 8th, this thing was also released. And so it is available so people can do real-time comparisons of the real versus nominal data. And then, like I was saying, so what difference does it make? So this is a picture of the overall wholesale sales. So this is total wholesale NAICS Sector 42 level, where the gray line represents the nominal estimate. So that's the line we saw on that previous slide that for sales. And that shows that big dip at the beginning of the pandemic, and then the big subsequent increases since then. But if you try to remove the price impacts of that using the data that we just talked about from the International Trade Program imports, from the manufacturing trade and the price indexes, you get the blue line, which is a much different picture than what the gray line shows. And shows, yes, there was likely some growth, but not nearly as steep. And that much of that growth was actually from price, was likely from price changes. We also, on the monthly survey, one of the things that gets a lot of attention is the trends or the month-to-month percent changes that we see, from 1 month to the next. So this is just a bar chart of about the last year or so of month-to-month changes. And so you can see not only does that time series graph look different, but how you might view a given month looks different. So on the far left, that's our March 22 month-over-month change. So this is March 22 over February 22, seasonally adjusted. And we published nominally up 2.1%. That's the gray bar. The blue bar, after you do price adjustment, shows that actually March was down 1.9%, implying that there was a lot of positive price impacts on that March 22 data. So as you can see, that's a totally different interpretation of that month. And having this information can help provide the user some insight on real dollar spending, or you think of real dollars maybe a proxy for demand. That gives you an idea of what demand really is. And you can see on this graph over the last 13 months here, how this has kind of changed. There are other months that are similar. Some months, like December of 22, the real dollar sales are much stronger, implying that by looking at that data, that might be a positive statement on demand. So that's been a real use to ourselves and to our users. Looking at just a couple of other industries, quickly to give you some other flavors. Lumber has been in the news. This is our lumber and other construction materials, NAICS code, NAICS 4233. And as we know, lumber prices went up pretty quickly with all the demand during the first year of the pandemic, and then have subsequently been coming down. And our nominal trend kind of follows that. And when you try to remove those price impacts, that's what the blue line is, what the real dollar trend time series looks like. So definitely a different picture. And of course, one of the ones that everybody has been focusing a lot on is food. This is the NAICS 4244, which is grocery and related product wholesalers. So these are wholesalers that generally provide grocery stores and restaurants with their goods. And so, you can kind of see a similar kind of pattern to what we saw on the lumber, where, a fairly steep slope of the line on a nominal basis, but a different picture when you look at the real dollar estimates over time. So, I think this has definitely been a good product. It's definitely helped us examine some of the underlying data and underlying trends in the data. We couldn't have done it without our partner, our colleagues who work on manufacturing and who work in international trade and import and export good data. We do have plans to make some improvements. One of the things we're obviously going to do is include the export data, because there are exports, as I showed you on that earlier slide. And then we're going to probably expand it to other areas. Probably the wholesale inventories might be a next logical step, as well as other sectors, maybe such as retail or service or manufacturing. So that's what's on the horizon. I did quote a lot of different data here. I did include in the slide a list of all the data sources, so you can explore them on your own. I've included my contact information here. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to explore or discuss any of this data more. More than willing to talk to you and help guide you and point you in the right direction. And with that, I think I will just say thank you. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to Henok, and he will pick up and talk to you a little bit more about the trade data.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy World Trade Month. It is a thing. So I'm glad that you guys joined us to learn about what we have in terms of real dollar data. But before I start my presentation, like I mentioned, my name is Henok Kabidi. I work in the international trade macro analysis branch, and basically we are responsible for the international trade statistics, dissemination of all international trade data, and then also the U.S. International Trade in Goods and Services Report. That's a monthly indicator that we release jointly with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So I'm glad that you guys are joining us. My main objective today is to show you where we have real dollar data. And So I will go through the slides to show you where you can access this data, and then also be able to navigate through our website of how to access it, how to download it, and then also want to take some time to show you some of our tools that we use for international trade statistics. So real dollar data, mainly where we have it is in the FT900 or our monthly release in Exhibit 10. That's the other thing that, like, a little nuance that I want to share with you is we call tables exhibits here. So please bear with me when I mention exhibits. Technically, they are tables. So the main website for our data is census.gov/trade. And from that point on, you can navigate through pretty much accessing historical data, current data, and all our tools. And I'll go through that a little later to show you how to navigate through that. So on a monthly basis, we have real dollar data for all end use commodities or all end use categories, and in total basis in Exhibit 10 for exports and imports. And we also have it for 2-year data, current month, and then also prior month aggregated at the year-to-date level, and also annual. And in Exhibit 11, actually, that goes into petroleum and non-petroleum and total census basis data. So that's another table that we have in our FT900 release. And this one provides 3-year data. So it's current year and 2 prior year data for current month, year-to-date, and annual. And then it provides real dollar data for petroleum and non-petroleum. What if you are looking for historical? So the navigation for that is up here, census.gov/trade. Then you go to data, to real data, and I'll go through that later, but this is a path to get to that. And this basically provides the historical series for real dollar data for all end use categories, monthly and annual, from 1994 to current month. Current month would be March 2023. So this is where we have the 2 places where we have real dollar data in table format, and you can access them in PDF and Excel. So what do we do with that data? Scott showed you the trend in terms of nominal and real and how they behave in order to kind of see what the effect of inflation is for, in our case, for imports. So in looking at that, the rule of thumb is if, in this case, the orange line is a nominal and the blue line is real. So if the real, like what it shows is the gap here, especially from January 20 and the pandemic years to current, including the start of the Ukraine war. So prior to 2022, mainly in the pandemic years, you see the gap here showing more of a deflationary environment. Mind you, unlike wholesale, this is not, we also have other factors like for imports specifically, like exchange rates, and then the dollar has been pretty strong with other exchange rates. So goods imported are, if you factor in exchange rates, are a little cheaper. So that shows here like the gap that is between the real and nominal. And then when we move to 2022, we see the effect of inflation due to mainly petroleum and energy products due to the war. So there's the flip side where the nominal is above the real line. So that says that inflation is a factor, higher prices are driving. So this is how basically we use our data to determine, hey, if we take out the effects of inflation, what is it telling us? The methodology that we use is called chain dollar series. And the base year or the index year is 2012. And we update that every 5 years. So the next base year will be 2017. And that will be updated with our April statistics, which will be released next month on June 7th, 2023. And then Census Bureau, Scott pretty much explained how this is calculated in terms of, chain dollar series and how we use our deflators by getting several indices as a source. For our case, for international trade, we use export and import price indexes or price indices, forgive me, for calculating the deflators. But for certain goods, like in capital goods for civilian aircraft, we also use a producer price index, which we get from BLS. Here's another example in terms of diving into a particular end use category. So for when we look at consumer goods, real versus nominal, unlike for the total, it's closely tied together. So the darker line shows the real and the lighter line shows the nominal. And then the break you see here, the slight gap you see here would be mainly, again, the effects of the Ukraine war, the war in Ukraine. But for the most part, for consumer goods, it is closely tied together. Real and nominal are closely tied together. But how about if we look at trends from, starting in January? Again, there is a lot of fluctuations. If you look at the month-to-month change in real dollar trade or for imports in consumer goods, and the trend is kind of going down to where we are currently. But mostly in 2022, we see the price changes, the fluctuations, and now we're in 2023 is slightly coming back up. If we dive down into further consumer goods, select goods. So we selected, how does it, and how do like apparel and footwear, pharmaceutical preparations, furniture, household appliances, how do they behave in terms of inflation? Is there an impact in inflation? How does it compare between nominal and real? And for the most part, it tracks the top category for consumer goods. But if you look closely, pretty much every single line is in line, and this is nominal, this is real, follows the same path, the same trend. But pharmaceutical preparations is slightly higher in nominal versus real, which tells me that the impact of price is there for pharmaceutical preparations. So these are data that the main reason that we use real dollar data is to compare. First is to look at the effects of inflation, and we have this data. And B is easier, especially with the chain dollar method. It's easier to compare 1 year over the other. And what I'm going to do now, so go into some of the tools that we have, specifically USA Trade Online and Global Market Finder. And navigate through our webpage and how to access that data. And then we will open it up for questions right after that. So let me move. So our website, which is newly redesigned, and what I would hope all of you, or if not most of you, would bookmark this page, census.gov/trade. will get you to the main page of our site, and then the data section is where I'm at right now, and that's where you find pretty much all the data that we have on our website. First and foremost, what I've mentioned is what we release on a monthly basis is up top here, and the advanced report, which is a week prior to our main release. Those are here, and then when you click on these, it will take you to a page where you can access all the exhibits or the tables in the International Trade Report. I'll go back, and it's laid out in such a way that we have prior releases here, and then other press releases here, besides what we release for our monthly. We have other releases in I mentioned the Advanced Economic Indicators Report. We also have a monthly report that we specifically focuses on steel. And then we have annual releases, our trade flow data for with Puerto Rico and U.S. possessions, and other data related to trade, with specifically providing profile of U.S. importing, exporting companies, manufacturing and international trade report, etc. So that's where you will get most of our data. And then as far as historical data, and where I access real dollar data, is under the historical data section. Seasonally adjusted and real dollar data will take you to the real data, which I showed a screenshot of, and you can download the PDF or the Excel.
Sorry, really quick. You're presenting the slides. That's what I see right now.
Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes, I see the Real Data website.
Okay, thanks, Tia. So in that case, I'll go back to where I started. The international trade data page is where we have all the data here. Mainly our showcase report, the FT900, is at the top. And when you click on that, it will take you to the files for the current month, all the files in Excel, and the main report that has pretty much all the tables in PDF, and the zip has pretty much all the tables as well. So if you want to specifically get real dollar data that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, is Exhibit 10 and Exhibit 11 are also right here. I also mentioned the Advanced Economic Indicators Report, which is a monthly report that comes a week prior to our main release, and it's available here, second in line. And we have the current month and the historical data in those sections. So what I'm going to do is quickly go show you where the real data is under seasonally adjusted data, and then we have real data, the link for that right there. On the left-hand side, we have different tools for regulations, Schedule B, other references, also our main tools that we use for international trade data, USA Trade Online and Global Market Finder. So what I'm going to quickly go through is show you how to access international trade data. Specifically, in this case, it would be not seasonally adjusted data. And USA Trade Online, USA Trade Online, I have the tab open over here, is a free subscription tool which houses pretty much all our data dating back to the 90s, and on an annual basis and monthly basis from 2002. So it's pretty much our go-to in addition to the API. But what makes it different is USA Trade Online has in terms of time series, it goes further than the API. So the one requirement for USA Trade Online, although it's free, is that you have to sign up. But once you sign up and you create your user ID, you get to, let me go to the main page here, which has different data sets. And these data sets are separated or categorized by different classification systems. And the main classification system is the harmonized system. And that has the district level data has the most detail in terms of our products. And then we have port and state level data for 6-digit HS codes. And then we also have NAICS. And this is basically where we house our international trade data. Alternatively, let me see if I can. Alternatively, you can go to the Global Market Finder, which is another interactive tool that we created. And mainly this is for exporters, and it gives you a snapshot of what is a good market for my product if I am interested in exporting goods, whether I'm a small business, a large business, but if I want to expand different markets for export, this gives you a quick snapshot. Now, mind you, there are a lot of other factors when it comes to exporting that that could be considered constraints. And our friends in ITA or Small Business Administration can help with understanding different markets, whatever characteristics they may have, whatever constraints they may have in terms of developing your business plan. But this will give you a quick idea of where you want to go in terms of a market. So one, quickly, if it allows me, because sometimes it's slow. Sorry. What I would do is I will show you how to do it in USA Trade Online in terms of exports of fishing rods. And that's what we usually use for, in terms of showing, hey, in Global Market Finder, what is the best market. But this same data, actually, you can expand it for further years and finding out, to find out what trade of exports of fishing rods looks like in USA Trade Online. So if we type in under exports for fishing rods, one advantage that it has is you don't have to know the code itself, and it provides you a list of commodity codes or products for fishing rods, and the lowest level or the highest detail that we want for that specific product is this number right here. So quickly, if I want to analyze for 2022, 2023, and 2021 for different, for value, I can click here and then see what we have in terms of value for this particular product. But what we want to know is like what markets are viable for this, for fishing rods. So if we go into country and select every single country, and it will sort them out. I'll rearrange so I have a better visual for my table. What I would do is I would take country to and make it a row, and then commodities isn't one single commodity. I'll take that over there, and voila, you have 3 years of data on an annual basis, but we can also make it look a little better in terms by taking out all the zero and empty values. And then sort by 2022. And it shows you right there is United Kingdom, Australia, Denmark, Netherlands, and Japan are the top 5 export markets for fishing rods. So we do training. So if you, let me bring up my presentation slide. You can contact us, our office, in terms of finding out, hey, if you want specific or any training in terms of using our tools. Here's the information, email and phone number. And definitely you can contact us in terms of any questions that you may have in this presentation or our data. With that, I will turn it back over, or if you have any questions, you can do that. Or before questions, actually, if you have any feedback, please fill out this survey link that is shown here to let us know how we did with the webinar. Are there any questions, Tia or Paul?
So far, we have been responding to the questions.
Hi there. Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both. Tia or Paul, are there any questions that would be relevant to the group that you would like to share since we have a little time? If not, we won't prolong it. We will just move right along. Certainly want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. Special thanks to our presenters, Scott Sheeler and Hinoc Kabidi from the Economic Indicators Division. And I hope all of you have received several takeaways today that you can benefit from for expanding globally and assisting with your business strategies. So once again, as Hinoc mentioned, please complete the evaluation. Let us know how the webinar went today and provide us with any feedback that you would like to share and possibly provide content that we can bring to you in the future. And just as a reminder, the PowerPoint transcript and recording will be placed on the Census Academy site, and you should have received that link in the chat. And once again, happy World Trade Month, and this completes the webinar, and have a great afternoon.